The rain hit like bullets against Elena Vasquez's face, each drop stinging her exhausted skin as she stumbled down Fifth Avenue clutching a plastic bag of groceries she couldn't afford. Her scrubs clung to her body, soaked through after 16 hours in the pediatric emergency room, and her feet screamed inside shoes held together with duct tape. $8.43. That's what remained in her checking account until Friday, and Friday felt like a lifetime away when her stomach was eating itself and her landlord's eviction notice burned a hole in her backpack. The thunderstorm had emptied the streets in minutes, sending everyone with sense running for cover. Elena should have been one of them. Should have been home, dry, collapsing into her lumpy mattress. But the bus didn't run this route after 9, and her car had died 3 months ago, repoed along with what remained of her dignity. So she walked, always walking, always tired, always one crisis away from complete collapse. That's when she heard the scream. Not a startled yelp or annoyed shout, a genuine sound of terror that cut through the storm like a blade. Elena's head snapped toward the intersection of 5th and Madison. Through the curtain of rain, she saw a small figure crumpled on the sidewalk, a woman in a business suit backing away with her hands over her mouth before turning and running. Other pedestrians scattered like roaches when lights flipped on, disappearing into doorways and around corners, leaving the child alone on the flooding concrete. Elena's nursing instincts fired before her survival ones could stop her. She dropped her groceries, there went dinner and tomorrow's breakfast, and sprinted toward the intersection. Her shoes splashed through puddles, water soaking through to her socks, but she didn't slow down, couldn't slow down, because even from 30 feet away she could see the unnatural stillness of the small body, the blue tinge spreading across lips that should have been pink. Where are you watching from? What would you do if you saw a child dying while everyone else ran away? Let me know in the comments. Elena crashed to her knees beside the boy, her hands already moving to check for a pulse. He couldn't have been more than 7 years old, dressed in expensive clothes that looked absurd against the dirty sidewalk. Designer jeans, a button-down shirt with some fancy logo she didn't recognize, shoes that probably cost more than her monthly rent. His dark hair was plastered to his forehead, and his skin had that terrible waxy quality she'd seen too many times in the ER. No pulse at the carotid, no rise and fall of his chest, no response when she called out to him. No, no, no. The words tumbled from her lips as she tilted his head back, checking his airway. Clear. She positioned her hands over his sternum, locking her elbows, and began compressions. 1, 2, 3, 4. She counted aloud, her voice barely audible over the storm. The rain hammered her back, running down her face and into her eyes, but she didn't stop. 15 compressions. Then she sealed her mouth over his and gave 2 rescue breaths, watching his chest rise and fall with the air she forced into his lungs. Nothing. Her arms burned as she started another round of compressions. 30 this time. Harder. Faster. She'd done this 100 times in the hospital, but never alone. Never in the rain. Never with a child who looked so much like her little brother had looked that day at the lake. The memory tried to claw its way up from the place she'd buried it, but she shoved it back down. Not now. Focus. Come on, sweetheart. Come on. Another 2 breaths. His lips were so cold against hers. Breathe for me. Please breathe. 2 minutes felt like 2 hours. Her shoulders screamed. Her knees throbbed against the concrete. Water pooled around them, and she had the insane thought that they might both drown right here on a city street. But then, there. A flutter beneath her fingers. Faint, irregular, but present. A pulse. Elena gasped, adjusting her position to support his head as he suddenly convulsed, coughing up water. She rolled him onto his side, one hand cradling his skull, the other rubbing his back as he choked and sputtered. His eyes flew open, dark brown, wide with terror and confusion, and fixed on her face. "You're okay," she whispered, pulling him against her chest and shielding his small body from the rain with her own. Her hand found her phone, fingers shaking so badly she could barely dial. "You're okay now. I've got you. 911. Yes. I need an ambulance at 5th and Madison. Child, approximately 7 years old, cardiac arrest, pulse restored. He's breathing, but—" The screech of tires cut through her words. 3 black SUVs materialized out of the storm like something from a nightmare, their headlights blinding as they surrounded the intersection. Elena's heart, which had just started to slow down, kicked back into overdrive. Doors flew open and men poured out. 8, 9, 10 of them, all dressed in dark suits that did nothing to hide the guns visible at their waists and shoulders. They moved with military precision, forming a perimeter, and Elena's arms instinctively tightened around the boy. Then he emerged from the middle vehicle. Dominic Torino stepped into the rain like he owned the storm itself. Even soaked, even with water streaming down his face, he radiated a kind of power that made Elena's mouth go dry. He had to be in his early 40s, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair graying at the temples and a face that would have been handsome if it weren't currently twisted in an expression of absolute terror. His suit probably cost more than Elena made in 6 months, and the watch on his wrist could have paid off her student loans twice over. But none of that mattered because his eyes, dark and desperate and drowning, were locked on the child in Elena's arms. "Marco!" The name came out broken, barely a whisper, then louder, anguished. "Marco!" He fell to his knees beside them, his expensive suit hitting the filthy water without hesitation, and his hands reached for the boy with a gentleness that seemed impossible from someone so dangerous. Because Elena knew who he was now. Everyone in the city knew the name Dominic Torino, knew what he did, knew to stay far away from him and anyone associated with him. "Papa?" The boy's voice was weak, confused, but the single word transformed Dominic's face from terrifying to devastated. "I'm here. I'm here. Figlio mio." His hands shook as they touched Marco's face, his hair, checking for injuries with the frantic energy of a parent's worst nightmare come true. Then his gaze shifted to Elena, and she felt the full weight of his attention like a physical force. You saved him." It wasn't a question. His voice was rough, thick with emotion she couldn't name, and his eyes were doing something complicated. Gratitude and suspicion and desperation all tangled together. Elena's survival instincts finally kicked in, screaming at her to run, to get away from this man and his guns and his reputation. But her legs wouldn't work, and Marco was still clutching her soaked scrub top with one small fist. "I'm a nurse," she managed, her voice coming out steadier than she felt. "He wasn't breathing. I did CPR. He needs a hospital. I called 911. They're coming. Cancel it." Dominic's command was directed at one of his men, who immediately pulled out a phone. Then back to Elena. "What's your name?" Elena. Elena Vasquez. Look, I don't want any trouble. I just wanted to help." No one else stopped. His words cut through hers, sharp and wondering. The street was full of people and no one else stopped. Just you. She didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know how to explain that she'd spent her whole life stopping for people everyone else walked past. That her brother's death had carved a hole in her chest that could only be filled by saving others. That she'd never learned how to look away from suffering, even when it would have been smarter to do so. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Dominic's head snapped up, and something shifted in his expression. A decision made, a path chosen. He stood in one fluid movement, Marco cradled against his chest and looked down at Elena still kneeling in the rain. "You're coming with us." "What? No, That wasn't a request, Miss Vasquez." His voice had changed, gone cold and commanding, the vulnerable father disappearing behind the mask of the man who ran half the city's underworld. "You saved my son's life. We need to talk. My men will collect your things." "I don't have things. I have an apartment and a job and—" Elena tried to stand, but her legs had turned to water. One of the men stepped forward, offering his hand. She took it because she had no choice. letting him pull her to her feet. "You can't just kidnap me." Something that might have been amusement flickered across Dominic's face. "I can do whatever I want, Miss Vasquez, but I'm not kidnapping you. I'm ensuring my son gets the medical attention he needs from someone he trusts, and I'm making sure the person who saved his life is properly thanked. Now, please, get in the car." The please didn't make it less of an order. Elena looked at Marco, who was watching her with those huge dark eyes, his small hand reaching toward her even as his father held him. She looked at the armed men surrounding them. She looked at her spilled groceries floating in the gutter, at her phone still clutched in her hand with the 911 operator's voice tinny and distant. She looked at the life she'd been living, exhausted, broke, alone, and at the moment that had just changed everything. "Okay," she whispered, because what else could she say? The car was warm and dry and smelled like expensive leather. Elena sat across from Dominic, who had Marco wrapped in a blanket on his lap, a private doctor already examining the boy with practiced efficiency. She watched the city blur past the tinted windows, her mind struggling to catch up with what was happening. 20 minutes ago she'd been walking home. Now she was in a car with a Mafia boss, and her hands wouldn't stop shaking. "His vitals are stabilizing," the doctor said, his voice professionally calm, "but he needs a full cardiac workup. This wasn't drowning, Mr. Torino." His heart stopped. "I know what it was." Dominic's jaw clenched, his arms tightening around Marco. "We'll discuss it at home, with privacy." The doctor nodded and retreated to the front seat, leaving the three of them in tense silence. Elena could feel Dominic studying her, his gaze moving over her cheap scrubs, her worn shoes, her exhausted face. She probably looked like exactly what she was. Someone barely surviving. Someone who couldn't afford to get involved with people like him. "How long have you been a nurse?" he asked finally. 5 years, pediatric emergency medicine. She forced herself to meet his eyes. "Look, I'm glad Marco's okay, but I really need to go home. I have work tomorrow and—" "You're not going home tonight." The words landed like stones in water. Elena's stomach dropped. "Excuse me?" "My son nearly died in the middle of the street, Miss Vasquez. I need to know why. I need to know who you are. I need to know if this was an accident or something more." His voice was reasonable, but his eyes were hard. "You'll stay at my estate tonight. Tomorrow we'll talk. After that, if you want to leave, you can leave." "I don't believe you." "Smart woman." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "But I'm telling the truth. I'm not a monster, Miss Vasquez. I'm a father who's terrified and grateful and trying to make sense of what just happened. Give me tonight. Please." That "please" again, softer this time. Elena looked at Marco, who had fallen asleep against his father's chest, his breathing steady but his face still too pale. She thought about the terror in Dominic's voice when he'd said his son's name. She thought about the gentleness in his hands as he'd checked Marco for injuries. She thought about the guns and the reputation, and the very real possibility that she was making the worst decision of her life. "One night," she said, "then I go home." "One night," he agreed. The estate appeared through the rain like something from a movie. Massive iron gates, a long driveway lined with trees, and then the mansion itself, all stone and glass and money Elena couldn't comprehend. Armed guards were positioned every 50 feet, their presence both reassuring and terrifying. The car pulled up to the front entrance and more staff materialized, a housekeeper, security personnel, the doctor from the car, all moving with efficient purpose. Dominic carried Marco inside, and Elena followed because she didn't know what else to do. The foyer was bigger than her entire apartment, with marble floors and a chandelier that probably cost more than she'd earn in a lifetime. Original paintings hung on the walls. She recognized a Caravaggio, or at least a very good copy, and fresh flowers filled crystal vases on antique tables. This wasn't just wealth. This was generational power, Old money mixed with new danger, beauty built on blood. Rosa will show you to a guest room, Dominic said, already moving toward the stairs with Marco. There are clothes in the closet, whatever you need. We'll talk in the morning. Wait. Elena started forward, then stopped as two security guards moved subtly into her path. Not threatening, just present. Just reminding her that she was here at Dominic's pleasure, not her own choice. Is Marco going to be okay? Dominic paused on the stairs, his back to her. For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he turned, and the vulnerability in his face made her chest ache. I don't know, he said quietly. But because of you, he's alive to find out. Thank you, Elena. He used her first name like a promise, like a claim, and then he was gone, disappearing up the stairs with his son. Elena stood in the massive foyer, dripping rain onto marble floors, and tried to remember how to breathe. This way, miss. Rosa, the housekeeper, was older, maybe 60, with kind eyes and a gentle voice. She led Elena through hallways that seemed to go on forever, past rooms glimpsed through open doors, a library, a sitting room, what looked like a home theater. Finally, they reached a guest suite that was bigger than Elena's entire apartment. There's a bathroom through there, Rosa said, gesturing to a door. Clothes in the closet should fit. Mr. Torino had them brought in while we were driving. If you need anything, use the phone by the bed. Kitchen is always open. He had clothes brought in? Elena's voice came out, faint. How did he know my size? Rosa's smile was sad and knowing. Mr. Torino is very thorough, miss. Try to rest. You've had quite a night. She left, and Elena heard the subtle click of a lock engaging. She tried the door. It opened from the inside, but she'd bet money it was being watched from the outside. She wasn't a prisoner exactly, but she wasn't free either. The bathroom was marble and gold, with a shower big enough for 4 people and towels softer than anything Elena had ever touched. She stood under water so hot it almost burned, washing away the rain and the street grime and the feeling of Marco's cold lips against hers as she'd breathed life back into his lungs. Her hands still shook. Her knees were bruised and scraped from the concrete, and somewhere in this massive house a little boy was alive because she'd stopped when everyone else ran. The clothes in the closet fit perfectly. Designer brands she recognized from magazines, jeans that probably cost $500, soft sweaters in her exact size. It should have been comforting. Instead, it was terrifying. Because it meant Dominic Torino had resources to find out everything about her in the time it took to drive from the city to his estate. It meant he knew where she lived, where she worked, probably how much debt she carried and what she'd eaten for breakfast. It meant she was in deeper than she'd realized. Elena pulled on the softest pajamas she'd ever worn and climbed into a bed that felt like sleeping on a cloud. Silk sheets, down pillows, a mattress that probably cost more than her car had. She should have been grateful, should have been relieved to be warm and dry and safe. Instead, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, and wondered what price she'd pay for saving Marco Torino's life. The answer came at 3 a.m. in the form of a small knock on her door. Elena jerked awake, disoriented in the unfamiliar room. The knock came again, tentative and quiet. She crossed to the door, half expecting guards or Rosa or some new development in this surreal night. Instead, she found Marco standing in the hallway, clutching a stuffed lion and looking impossibly small in pajamas covered in cartoon characters. I had a bad dream, he whispered, about dying. Elena's heart cracked open. She knelt down to his level, not touching but close enough to be comforting. Do you want to talk about it? He shook his head, then nodded, then shook it again. His eyes filled with tears. I couldn't breathe. I was so scared. And then you were there, and you breathed for me, and I came back. You did come back. Elena's voice was gentle. You're safe now, Marco. Will you read me a story? Papa tries, but he's not very good at the voices. A small smile flickered across his face, there and gone. "You seem like you'd be good at voices." She should have said no. Should have called for Rosa or a guard or anyone else. But Marco was looking at her with those huge, dark eyes, and she'd never learned how to say no to a child who needed her. "Okay," she said softly. "Let's find you a story." His room was down the hall, decorated in blues and greens with bookshelves full of stories and toys that looked barely touched. Elena settled into the chair beside his bed while Marco climbed under his covers, the stuffed lion tucked against his chest. She picked up the first book she found, something about a brave little mouse, and began to read. She did all the voices, made Marco giggle with her squeaky mouse impression and her gruff cat voice, watched him relax, his breathing evening out, his grip on the lion loosening. By the time she reached the end, his eyes were closed, his face peaceful in sleep. Elena started to stand, but his hand shot out and caught hers. "Don't go," he mumbled, not quite awake. "Please don't go." So she stayed, sat in the chair beside his bed, his small hand wrapped around her fingers, and watched him sleep. Watched his chest rise and fall with steady breaths that she'd given back to him. Felt something shift inside her chest, some wall she'd built after her brother died beginning to crack. She'd saved his life tonight. But sitting here in the dark, listening to him breathe, she realized he might be saving something in her too. That's how Dominic found them when he checked on his son an hour later, Marco sleeping peacefully, Elena dozing in the chair beside him, their hands linked across the space between them. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching this stranger who'd crashed into their lives and changed everything, and felt something he hadn't felt since Sophia died. Hope. Morning came with coffee and questions. Elena woke in the chair, her neck stiff and her back aching, to find Rosa gently shaking her shoulder. Marco was still asleep, his hand still holding hers, and sunlight was streaming through the windows. "Mr. Torino would like to see you," Rosa said quietly. "I'll stay with the boy." Elena carefully extracted her hand from Marco's grip and followed Rosa downstairs to a room that looked like a library crossed with an interrogation chamber. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, leather furniture, and Dominic Torino behind a massive desk, looking like he hadn't slept at all. His head of security stood beside him, a man named Vincent with cold eyes and a gun visible at his hip. "Sit down, Miss Vasquez." Dominic gestured to a chair across from him. His voice was formal, distant, nothing like the grateful father from last night. "We need to talk." Elena sat, her stomach churning. In the daylight, away from the rain and the crisis, this felt more real, more dangerous. She was in the home of one of the most powerful criminals in the city, and she had no idea what he wanted from her. "Tell me exactly what happened last night," Dominic said. "From the beginning. Don't leave anything out." So she did. Told him about walking home from her shift, about hearing the scream, about finding Marco collapsed and not breathing. Told him about the CPR, about the pulse returning, about calling 911. She didn't mention her groceries floating in the gutter, or the $8 in her bank account, or how she'd been so tired she could barely stand. Just the facts, clinical and clear. Dominic listened without interrupting, his face unreadable. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair and studied her like she was a puzzle he was trying to solve. "Vincent thinks you're part of a setup," he said finally, "that someone paid you to be there, to gain my trust by saving Marco." Elena's mouth fell open. "That's insane. I didn't even know who he was until you showed up." "Can you prove that? Can I prove I'm not part of some elaborate conspiracy?" Her voice rose despite her best efforts to stay calm. "No, I can't prove a negative. But I'm a pediatric nurse who works 80-hour weeks and can barely afford groceries. I don't run in circles where people hire me to save Mafia bosses' children." "Then explain why you stopped." Vincent's voice was hard. "Everyone else ran. Why didn't you?" "Because I watched my little brother drown when I was 16. And I've spent every day since trying to save enough children to make up for the one I couldn't save, because I'm too stupid or too stubborn to look away from suffering, because I'm a nurse and that's what we do. But she didn't say any of that, just looked Vincent in the eye and said, because he was dying and I could help, that's all. The silence stretched. Then Marco's voice came from the doorway, small and certain. She saved me, Papa. She breathed for me when I couldn't breathe. She held me when I was scared. She read me stories with funny voices. All three adults turned to see Marco standing there in his pajamas, the stuffed lion under one arm, his other hand clutching the doorframe like he needed the support. Rosa hovered behind him, looking apologetic. I'm sorry, Mr. Torino. He woke up and insisted, It's fine, Rosa. Dominic's voice had changed, softened. He stood and crossed to his son, kneeling down to his level. You should be resting, Figlio. I heard Vincent being mean to Elena. Marco's chin lifted stubbornly. She's nice. She's not bad. I know she's not. How do you know? Dominic asked gently. Because bad people don't make you feel safe. Marco looked at Elena, and his eyes were older than 7, older than they should be. She makes me feel safe. Elena's throat closed. She watched Dominic's face transform as he looked at his son, saw the moment the suspicion cracked and something else took its place. He pulled Marco into a hug, fierce and careful at the same time, and when he looked at Elena over his son's head, the walls were down. Vincent, leave us. It was an order, and Vincent obeyed, though his expression made it clear he still had doubts. The door closed, and Dominic stood with Marco in his arms, the little boy's head on his shoulder. I'm sorry for the interrogation, Miss Vasquez. I had to be sure. And now you're sure. Elena's voice came out steadier than she felt. Now I'm sure. He carried Marco to the couch and sat, settling his son beside him. Marco has a genetic heart condition. His mother, my wife, died giving birth to him. The same condition killed her. We've been managing it with medication and monitoring, but yesterday... His jaw clenched. Yesterday, he was at school. They called me, said he'd collapsed during recess. By the time I got there, he was gone. Just gone. They said he ran, and I don't know why, but he ran and he got away from his guards and... I wanted to see the rain, Marco whispered. We never get to see the rain. There's always guards and cars, and Papa's always worried, and I just wanted to stand in the rain like a normal kid. Dominic's eyes closed. Pain etched across his face. So you ran. And your heart couldn't take it. I'm sorry, Papa. Don't be sorry. Never be sorry for wanting to be a child. Dominic's voice broke. I'm the one who should be sorry. I've kept you so locked up, so protected, that you had to run away just to feel the rain. Elena watched them, this father and son bound by love and fear and loss, and felt like an intruder on something private. She started to stand, to give them space, but Dominic's voice stopped her. Don't go. Please, we need to talk. She sat back down, waiting. Marco needs a live-in pediatric nurse, Dominic said, his hand stroking his son's hair with unconscious tenderness. Someone who understands his condition, who can monitor him, who can respond if something happens. Someone he trusts. Elena's heart started to pound. You have doctors. You have money for the best care. I have doctors who see him as a patient. I have nurses who are terrified of me and treat him like he's made of glass. I have money that can buy everything except what he needs most. Dominic looked at her, and his eyes were desperate. He needs someone who sees him as a child first. Someone who isn't afraid to let him live while keeping him safe. Someone who makes him feel safe. You want me to move in here? Elena's voice was flat. Live in your house. Take care of your son. Yes. I have a job, a life, an apartment. I'll pay you $50,000 a month. The number landed like a bomb. Elena's mouth opened, but no sound came out. I'll pay off your student loans, all $47,000 of them. I'll cover your rent until your lease is up, then you won't need it. You'll have your own suite here, complete privacy. You'll have access to anything you need. And when Marco is stable, when we're confident in his care routine, you can leave. 6 months, maybe a year. $50,000 a month. Her loans paid off. She did the math automatically. In 6 months, she'd have more money than she'd seen in her entire life. She could go back to school, specialize, build the career she'd always dreamed of. She could stop living paycheck to paycheck, stop eating ramen for dinner, stop being so tired she could barely function. But she'd be living with a Mafia boss. She'd be part of his world, with all the danger that implied. She'd be giving up her independence, her freedom, her life as she knew it. I can't, she said, even as part of her screamed that she was insane to refuse. I'm sorry, but I can't. Dominic nodded slowly, like he'd expected this. Then he pulled out his phone and brought up something on the screen, turned it so Elena could see. It was a police report, about her brother, about the day he drowned, about how she'd been there, had tried to save him, had failed. Details she'd never told anyone. Private pain laid bare on a screen. I know everything about you, Elena Vasquez. His voice was quiet, not threatening, just stating fact. I know about your mother's cancer, about the medical bills that bankrupted your family. I know you work double shifts and donate to the hospital's charity fund even though you can barely afford food. I know you volunteer at the children's clinic on your days off. I know you're drowning in debt and exhaustion and you're too stubborn to ask for help. Elena's hands clenched in her lap. That's not fair. No, it's not. Nothing about this is fair. He put the phone away. But I'm not trying to threaten you or manipulate you. I'm showing you that I understand who you are. You're someone who saves people, even when it costs you everything. You saved my son. Now let me save you. By making me a prisoner in your house? By giving you the resources to do what you do best, care for children, without destroying yourself in the process. He leaned forward. I'm not asking you to love me or even like me. I'm asking you to help my son. And in return, I'll help you. That's all this is. A transaction. But it wasn't all this was, and they both knew it. Because Marco was looking at her with hope in his eyes, and Dominic was looking at her like she was the answer to a prayer he'd stopped believing could be answered, and Elena was looking at a chance to save more than just one life. She was looking at a chance to save herself. 6 months, she said finally, and I want it in writing. Contract, terms, everything legal. Done. Dominic stood, extending his hand. Thank you, Elena. She took his hand, felt the strength in his grip, the warmth of his skin, and tried to ignore the voice in her head screaming that she was making a deal with the devil. Marco threw his arms around her waist, nearly knocking her over. You're staying. You're really staying. Elena's hand automatically went to his hair, smoothing it back from his forehead. I'm staying, Bambino. For a little while, at least. It was supposed to be 6 months. A job. A transaction. But standing there in Dominic Torino's library with his son, hugging, her and his eyes watching her like she was something precious, Elena had the terrible feeling she'd just signed away more than 6 months of her life. She'd signed away her heart. The first week passed in a blur of routines and revelations. Elena moved into the guest suite that became her permanent room, her few possessions looking lost in the massive space. Dominic had her contract drawn up by the next morning, everything she'd asked for and more, including health insurance, a retirement account, and a clause that let her leave immediately if she ever felt unsafe. Marco's medical care became her primary focus. She met with his team of doctors, reviewed his charts, learned the intricacies of his condition. Long QT syndrome, they called it, a genetic disorder that affected his heart's electrical system, making him vulnerable to dangerous arrhythmias. The medication helped, but stress, exercise, even sudden noises could trigger an episode. He'd been living in a bubble, wrapped in cotton, terrified to move too much or feel too much or live too much. Elena's job was to keep him alive, but she decided her real job was to help him live. They started small, morning walks in the garden, just 15 minutes at first, with Elena monitoring his heart rate and watching for signs of distress. Marco was hesitant, always looking over his shoulder for his father's approval, always ready to stop at the first hint of discomfort. "You're okay," Elena told him on their third walk, when he'd started to breathe hard and panic had flickered across his face. "Your heart rate is elevated but stable. This is good. This is your body getting stronger. Papa says I have to be careful. Your papa's right, but careful doesn't mean frozen." She knelt beside him on the garden path, taking his pulse manually so he could see she wasn't worried. "You know what's amazing about hearts? They're muscles, and muscles get stronger when we use them properly. We're not going to do anything dangerous, but we're also not going to let fear stop you from living." Marco studied her face, then nodded slowly. "Okay, but if I die, Papa's going to kill you." Elena laughed despite herself. "Fair enough. Let's try not to die, then." The staff watched her with suspicion at first. She was an outsider, someone who'd appeared from nowhere and gained unprecedented access to the boss's son. Rosa warmed to her quickly, bringing her coffee in the mornings and teaching her which hallways to avoid when Dominic was in a mood. The security team took longer, but they respected competence, and Elena knew her job. Vincent remained cold, watching her with eyes that missed nothing. She couldn't blame him. In his position, she'd be suspicious too. Dominic himself was a study in contradictions. In the mornings, he was the Mafia boss, cold, efficient, taking calls in Italian and making decisions that probably involved things Elena didn't want to know about. But in the evenings, when he came to check on Marco, he transformed into just a father, tired and worried and grateful. He started joining them for dinner. Not every night, but often enough that it became expected. Marco would chatter about his day, the books Elena read to him, the games they played, the new exercises she was teaching him. And Dominic would listen with complete attention, like his son's words were the most important thing in the world. Elena found herself watching him during those dinners, noticing the way he cut Marco's food into smaller pieces without being asked, the way he'd reach over and brush hair from his son's forehead, the way his whole body relaxed when Marco laughed. She'd expected a monster. She was seeing a man. 6 weeks in, everything changed during a card game. Elena had been teaching Marco to play Go Fish, something simple and fun that didn't require too much concentration. They were in the library, cards spread across the coffee table, and Marco was winning because Elena was absolutely terrible at hiding her reactions. "Do you have any threes?" Marco asked, grinning because he knew she did. Elena sighed dramatically and handed over her cards. "You're too good at this, Bambino. That's because you're too nice. You have to be sneaky in cards." He added the threes to his pile, then looked up at her with those huge dark eyes. "Elena, why don't you have kids of your own?" The question hit like a punch. Elena's hands stilled on her cards. That's complicated. Is it because of your brother, the one who died?" She should have been surprised that he knew, should have asked who told him. But this was Dominic Torino's house, and information flowed like water here. "Partly," she said carefully. "After he died, I decided I wanted to help other kids instead. Being a nurse seemed like the best way to do that." "But don't you want a family someday?" "Someday, maybe. But for now, I have you to take care of. That's enough." Marco was quiet for a moment, organizing his cards with careful concentration. Then, without looking up, "I'm glad you're here. I know Papa hired you, but I'm still glad." "I'm glad, too." And she meant it, which was terrifying. They returned to the game, but something had shifted. Marco was more relaxed, more playful, making jokes and doing silly voices when he drew cards. Elena found herself laughing, really laughing, not the polite chuckle she used with patience, but genuine amusement that came from somewhere deep. That's when Dominic appeared in the doorway. Elena didn't notice him at first. She was too busy pretending to be outraged that Marco had stolen all her queens. But then she felt eyes on her and looked up to find Dominic standing there, frozen, his face doing something complicated. "Pepa! I'm winning!" Marco held up his cards triumphantly. "Elena's terrible at this game." "I can see that." Dominic's voice was rough. He moved into the room slowly, like he was approaching something fragile. "Mind if I join?" They made room for him on the couch, and Elena dealt him in. It should have been awkward, the boss joining their game, the power dynamic shifting. But Marco was so excited to have his father playing that the awkwardness dissolved into something warmer. Dominic was terrible at Go Fish, too. Or maybe he was pretending to be terrible, letting Marco win, making his son giggle with exaggerated reactions when he had to draw cards. Elena watched them together and felt something crack in her chest. This was what Marco needed. Not a father paralyzed by fear, but one who could play, who could be silly, who could let his son be a child. "Got any sevens?" Marco asked his father hopefully. "Go Fish." Dominic's smile was small but genuine. "You're not getting my sevens that easily. But Elena always gives me her sevens. That's because Elena has a terrible poker face." Dominic glanced at her and something in his eyes made her breath catch. "She's too honest. Can't hide what she's feeling." "Is that a bad thing?" Elena asked, trying to keep her voice light. "No." His gaze held hers. "It's refreshing." The moment stretched, loaded with something Elena couldn't name. Then Marco demanded his father's attention, and the spell broke. They played until Marco started yawning, his energy flagging as the evening wore on. Elena checked his vitals. All good, and Dominic carried him upstairs for bed. Elena started cleaning up the cards, trying to ignore the way her hands trembled slightly. This was getting complicated. She was getting attached, not just to Marco, but to this life, to these moments. To Dominic's rare smiles and the way he looked at her like she was solving problems he'd stopped believing could be solved. He hasn't laughed like that in years. She turned to find Dominic standing in the doorway again, his hands in his pockets, his expression unguarded. "He's a great kid," she said. "He just needed space to be one." "You're good with him, better than I am." "You're his father. He doesn't need you to be good at card games. He needs you to love him, which you clearly do." Dominic crossed to the window, looking out at the garden where they'd walked that morning. "His mother died because of me, because I got her pregnant, because my genetics killed her. Every time I look at him, I see what I took from him. A mother, a normal life, safety." Elena moved to stand beside him, not touching, but close. "You gave him life. You're raising him with love. You're doing everything you can to keep him healthy. That's not taking, Dominic. That's giving." He turned to look at her, and the vulnerability in his face made her throat tight. "I'm terrified every day that I'll lose him too, that I'll wake up and he'll be gone and it'll be my fault for not protecting him enough." Fear is part of loving someone. Elena's voice was soft, especially loving a child. But you can't let fear stop you from living. Marco needs to see you taking risks, making mistakes, being human. Otherwise, he'll grow up thinking he has to be perfect to be loved. When did you get so wise? I'm not wise. I'm just a nurse who's seen what happens when parents love too carefully. She thought of her own mother, who'd wrapped her in bubble wrap after her brother died, who'd been so afraid of losing another child that she'd nearly suffocated the one she had left. Sometimes the safest thing you can do is let go a little. Dominic was quiet for a long moment. Then, so softly she almost didn't hear, "Thank you for saving him, for staying, for this. This? For giving us back joy. I'd forgotten what it felt like." Elena's heart did something complicated in her chest. She wanted to step closer, to touch his hand, to offer comfort that went beyond words. But she held herself still, maintaining the professional distance that was already eroding faster than she'd expected. "You should get some sleep," she said instead. "You look exhausted." "So do you." "Occupational hazard," she managed to smile. "Good night, Dominic." "Good night, Elena." She left him standing at the window and retreated to her room, her mind spinning. This was supposed to be a job. 6 months, a transaction, nothing personal. But somewhere between the card games and the garden walks and the quiet moments watching Marco sleep, it had become personal. She was falling for both of them. The boy who needed her and the man who was trying so hard to be what his son needed. And she had no idea how to stop. 3 weeks later, the breakthrough came during an afternoon in the kitchen. Marco had been asking to help with cooking, and Elena had convinced the chef, a stern Italian man named Giuseppe, to let them make cookies. Giuseppe had protested, muttering about amateurs in his kitchen, but Rosa had intervened with a look that suggested he'd lose that argument. So Elena and Marco stood at the counter, flour and sugar and butter spread before them, following a simple recipe Elena remembered from childhood. Marco was careful, measuring everything precisely, worried about making mistakes. "What happens if I mess it up?" he asked, holding the measuring cup with both hands. "Then we eat weird-shaped cookies and laugh about it." Elena grinned at him. "Cooking isn't about being perfect, Bambino. It's about having fun and making something with love." They mixed the ingredients, and Marco's face lit up when Elena let him crack the eggs. He got shell in the bowl, and his expression immediately fell. "I ruined it." "You didn't ruin anything. Look." Elena fished out the shell bits with a spoon. "Easy fix. Mistakes just make the story better." "Papa says mistakes can be dangerous." "In his work, maybe, but not in cookies." Elena handed him a wooden spoon. "Here, mix this while I add the chocolate chips, and if you want to eat a few chips while you mix, I won't tell." Marco's eyes went wide. Then, with the air of someone committing a great crime, he popped a chocolate chip in his mouth. His face transformed into pure delight. "That's so good." "Right? Now imagine them baked into cookies." They mixed and laughed and made an absolute mess of Giuseppe's pristine kitchen. Flour ended up everywhere, on the counter, on their clothes, in Marco's hair. When Elena tried to show him how to roll the dough into balls, she accidentally flicked flour at him. His shocked expression lasted exactly 2 seconds before he retaliated, and suddenly they were in the middle of a flour fight, both of them covered in white powder and giggling uncontrollably. That's when Dominic walked in. Elena saw him first, standing in the doorway with his phone in his hand, clearly having come to check on something. His expression was stunned, taking in the scene. His son, covered in flour, laughing so hard he could barely breathe. Elena, equally messy and grinning like an idiot. "Papa!" Marco ran to him, leaving flory handprints on Dominic's expensive suit. "We're making cookies. Elena started a flour fight." "I can see that." Dominic's voice was strange, thick with emotion Elena couldn't identify. His eyes met hers over Marco's head, and something passed between them. Gratitude, wonder, something deeper that made her heart stutter. "I'm sorry about your suit," Elena started, but Dominic shook his head. "Don't be." He knelt down to Marco's level, his hands cupping his son's flour-covered face. "You're happy." "I'm making cookies." Marco said it like it was the most amazing thing in the world. "And Elena says mistakes make the story better, so it's okay that I got eggshell in the bowl." Dominic's eyes closed for a moment, and when they opened, they were bright with unshed tears. "She's right. Mistakes do make the story better." He looked at Elena again. "Thank you." She understood what he was thanking her for. Not the cookies or the flour fight, but for this moment, for his son laughing and covered in mess and acting like a normal 7-year-old, for giving him back something he thought was lost forever. "Come help us," Elena said impulsively. "We need someone to taste test." "I don't cook." "You don't have to cook. You just have to eat warm cookies and tell us they're the best you've ever had." She held out a chocolate chip. "Come on, live dangerously. A smile tugged at his lips, a real smile, not the careful one he usually wore. Dangerous cookies, that's a new one. He stayed, loosened his tie, rolled up his sleeves, and helped them finish the cookies. Giuseppe watched from the corner with an expression of horror mixed with reluctant approval. Rosa appeared with a camera and took photos, claiming they were for Marco's baby book but winking at Elena in a way that suggested they were for something else. The cookies turned out lumpy and misshapen and absolutely perfect. They ate them warm from the oven, sitting around the kitchen island, and Marco talked non-stop about everything. School and books and the games Elena taught him, and how he wanted to learn to play piano someday. Dominic listened to all of it, really listened, and Elena watched the tension drain from his shoulders. Watched him become less of a mafia boss and more of a father. Watched him reach over and wipe chocolate from Marco's chin with a gentleness that made her chest ache. This was what family looked like. Not perfect or polished, but real and messy and full of love. And Elena, who'd convinced herself she was just doing a job, realized she wanted this. Wanted these moments, and these people, and this life that had seemed so dangerous, but was actually the safest she'd ever felt. That evening, after Marco was asleep, Dominic found her on the terrace. She was sitting in one of the outdoor chairs, wrapped in a blanket against the cool night air, staring at the stars and trying to process the day. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. "It's your house. It's your space." But he sat anyway, in the chair beside hers, close enough that she could feel his warmth. "I wanted to talk to you about today." Elena's stomach tightened. "If it was too much, the flower fight and everything, I can be more careful." It was perfect. His voice was rough. "That's what I wanted to say. Today was perfect, and I don't know how to thank you for that." "You don't have to thank me. I was just making cookies." "You were giving my son his childhood back." Dominic leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped. "After Sophia died, I became obsessed with keeping Marco safe. I built this fortress, hired the best doctors, controlled every aspect of his life. And in doing that, I took away everything that makes life worth living." "You were scared. That's understandable." "Scared doesn't excuse it." He turned to look at her, and in the moonlight his face was unguarded. "I was so afraid of losing him that I forgot he needed more than just survival. He needed joy, laughter, mess, life. He needed his father to be human, not perfect. You keep saying things like that, like you understand something about parenting that I've missed." Elena pulled the blanket tighter. "My mother did the same thing after my brother died. Became so overprotective that I felt like I was suffocating. It took me years to understand she was just terrified of losing me too, but understanding didn't make it easier to live with." "How did you handle it?" "I left, went to nursing school across the country. Broke her heart to do it, but I had to. I had to learn to live without someone watching my every move, waiting for me to die too." She paused. "But Marco can't leave. He's 7, and he needs you, so you have to figure out how to let him live while keeping him safe. It's the hardest thing you'll ever do." Dominic was quiet for a long time. Then, "I don't think I can do it alone." "You're not alone. You have staff, doctors, security." "That's not what I mean." His hand moved, covering hers where it rested on the arm of her chair. His skin was warm, his touch gentle. "I mean, I can't do this without you. You've changed everything in 6 weeks, Elena. Marco is happier. I'm less terrified. This house feels like a home instead of a prison, and I don't know what we'll do when you leave." Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "I'm contracted for 6 months. I know, but I'm hoping—" He trailed off, then started again. "My wife died 7 years ago. I loved her desperately, and when she died, I thought that was it. No more love, no more vulnerability, no more risk. I would raise our son and keep him safe, and that would be enough." "Dominic, let me finish." His thumb stroked across her knuckles, a touch so gentle it made her eyes sting. Then you appeared in the rain, breathing life into my son, and everything changed. You're brave and kind, and you see us, really see us, not as a mafia boss and his damaged kid, but as people who need help. And I'm falling for you, Elena. I know I shouldn't. I know it's complicated and dangerous and probably the worst idea I've ever had. But I am. Elena couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only feel his hand on hers and see the vulnerability in his eyes and know that she was falling too, had been falling since that first night when he'd looked at her with gratitude and desperation and something that might have been hope. I'm falling for you too, she whispered, and you're right, it's a terrible idea. The worst. But he was smiling, small and uncertain. What do we do about it? I don't know. This isn't what I expected when I took this job. I know. And if it's too much, if you want to keep things professional, I understand. I won't make it weird. I just needed you to know how I feel. Elena looked at their joined hands, at this man who ran an empire but was asking her permission, giving her the power to decide what happened next. She thought about Marco asleep upstairs, about the life she'd built here in 6 weeks, about the way her heart felt fuller than it had in years. She thought about all the reasons this was a bad idea. The danger, the complications, the fact that she was supposed to leave in 6 months. And then she thought about the way Dominic looked at his son, the way he'd loosened his tie and made cookies, the way he was trying so hard to be better. I don't want to keep things professional, she said finally, but I need to go slow. For Marco's sake, if nothing else. He's attached to me, and if this doesn't work out, it will work out. Dominic's certainty was absolute. I don't know how yet, but it will. Because I'm not losing you, Elena. Either of you. Not if I can help it. He lifted her hand and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, his lips warm against her skin. Elena's breath caught, and when he looked at her, his eyes were dark with promise. We'll figure it out, he said softly. Together. Together, she echoed and felt the word settle into her bones like a vow. They sat there until the stars wheeled overhead, hands linked, not talking, just being. And Elena thought that maybe, just maybe, she'd found what she'd been looking for all along. Not just a job or a paycheck, but a place to belong. A family to call her own. The next 3 weeks passed in a haze of carefully managed normalcy. Elena and Dominic didn't tell Marco about their feelings. It was too new, too fragile, but the shift was obvious to anyone watching. The way Dominic found excuses to check on them during the day. The way Elena's face lit up when he walked into a room. The way they gravitated toward each other during family dinners, their shoulders touching, their smiles soft and private. Rosa noticed. Vincent noticed. Even Giuseppe the chef noticed, muttering something in Italian about young love and foolishness, but no one said anything, and life continued in its comfortable rhythm. Marco thrived. His medications were working, his heart stable, and the gentle exercise routine Elena had built was making him stronger. He'd gained weight, his face filling out, his energy improving. He laughed more, talked more, asked questions about everything. He was becoming the child he should have been all along. Elena fell more in love with both of them every day. With Marco's curiosity and sweetness, with Dominic's transformation from feared criminal to devoted father. She'd stopped thinking about the 6-month contract, stopped planning her exit. This was home now, whether she'd meant for it to be or not. Then, on a Tuesday morning in her 10th week at the estate, Vincent appeared at breakfast with news that shattered their peace. "We have a problem," he said, his face grim. "The Vitelli family is making moves." Dominic's expression went cold, the father disappearing behind the boss. "What kind of moves?" "Chatter about retaliation. They're still angry about the territory dispute last year and they're looking for leverage." Vincent's eyes flicked to Marco, then away. "They're targeting the boy." Elena's blood turned to ice. She looked at Marco, who was eating his cereal and oblivious to the conversation, and her hand automatically moved to rest on his shoulder. protective, claiming. How credible is the threat? Dominic's voice was deadly calm. Very. We intercepted communications. They're planning something for the next 2 weeks, while you're required to be in court for the Henderson case. Vincent pulled out his phone, showing Dominic something Elena couldn't see. They know you'll be vulnerable. They know the boy is your weakness. Marco is not a weakness. Dominic's words were ice. He's my son. To them, same thing. Vincent's expression was apologetic but firm. We need to increase security, lock down protocols, and we need to consider moving the boy to a safe house until the threat is neutralized. No. The word came from Elena, sharp and certain. Both men looked at her. You can't move him. The stress of separation from both of you, the fear, the upheaval, his heart can't handle it. It could trigger an episode worse than the one that nearly killed him. She's right, Dominic said quietly. We keep him here. We increase security, but we don't separate this family. Family? Vincent's eyebrow rose. Family, Dominic repeated, looking at Elena with an intensity that made her breath catch. Do whatever you need to do to keep them safe. Both of them. The estate transformed overnight. Guards tripled. Motion sensors appeared everywhere. Bulletproof glass was installed in windows. Elena and Marco weren't allowed outside without armed escorts. The comfortable home became a fortress, and the tension was suffocating. Marco felt it. He grew quiet, anxious. His heart rate elevated even during rest. Elena did everything she could to maintain normalcy. Reading, games, gentle exercises, but the fear was contagious. He had nightmares, started clinging to her during the day, asked questions she couldn't answer honestly. Why are there so many guards now? He asked one afternoon, watching men patrol the garden from his bedroom window. Your papa is just being extra careful, Elena said, checking his vitals for the 3rd time that day. There's nothing to worry about. You're worried, I can tell. Smart kid, too smart. Elena sat beside him on the bed and took his hand. I'm always a little worried about you, Bambino. That's my job. But I promise you're safe. I won't let anything happen to you. What if something happens to you? The question hit her like a punch. She pulled him into a hug, feeling his small heart beating against her chest. Steady, strong, alive. Nothing's going to happen to me. Or you, or your papa. We're all going to be fine. She hoped she wasn't lying. That night, unable to sleep, Elena found herself in the kitchen making tea. She was measuring honey when Dominic appeared, looking as exhausted as she felt. Can't sleep either? He asked. Too much adrenaline. She poured him a cup without asking. How bad is it, really? He didn't pretend not to understand. Bad. The Vitellis lost 2 territories and 3 key operations because of me. They want revenge, and they've decided the best revenge is making me suffer. Taking Marco would destroy me, and they know it. So, what's the plan? Vincent is working on it. We have people inside their organization, trying to get details, but it's going to come to a confrontation. It always does. He took the tea, his fingers brushing hers. I'm sorry, Elena. I never wanted you caught up in this. I'm not caught up in it. I'm choosing to be in it. She moved closer, drawn by the exhaustion in his eyes, the fear he was trying to hide. You're not doing this alone. You're a nurse, not a soldier. I'm someone who loves your son. That makes me a soldier whether I want to be or not. The admission hung between them, the first time she'd said the word love out loud. And I'm someone who's falling in love with you, which makes this even more complicated. Dominic set down his tea and pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was something precious. I love you too, he said against her hair. God help me, I love you too, and I'm terrified I'm going to get you killed. You're not going to get me killed. Elena pulled back enough to look at his face. We're going to get through this. We're going to keep Marco safe. And then we're going to have a very long conversation about what happens next. What happens next is you stay. Forever. If you'll have us. Forever's a long time. Not long enough. He kissed her then, soft and desperate, his hands cupping her face like she might disappear. Elena kissed him back, pouring everything she couldn't say into the touch. Fear and love and determination and hope. They broke apart at the sound of footsteps. Marco stood in the doorway, clutching his stuffed lion, his eyes wide. "Are you kissing Elena, Papa?" Dominic froze. Elena's mind raced, trying to figure out how to explain this to a 7-year-old. But before either of them could speak, Marco's face split into a grin. "Does this mean Elena's staying forever? Like, really forever?" Dominic looked at Elena, question in his eyes. She thought about her contract, about the 6 months that were supposed to end this. She thought about her old life, her apartment, her independence. And then she thought about this. These two people who'd become her whole world, this life she'd built, this love she'd found in the most unexpected place. "Yeah, Bambino," she said softly. "Really forever." Marco launched himself at them and they caught him together, the three of them tangled in a hug that felt like a promise, like a beginning, like a family. But outside the warm kitchen, in the darkness beyond the estate's walls, danger was gathering, and the peace they'd found was about to be tested in ways none of them could imagine. The attack came 4 days later at 4:17 in the morning. Elena woke to the sound of gunfire and explosions, her training kicking in before her brain fully processed what was happening. She rolled out of bed, grabbed her phone, and ran for Marco's room. The hallway was chaos, guards shouting, alarms blaring, the acrid smell of smoke already filtering through the ventilation system. Marco's door was open. Her heart stopped until she saw him sitting up in bed, eyes huge with terror, his stuffed lion clutched to his chest. She crossed to him in 3 strides, scooping him up and wrapping him in his blanket. "It's okay, baby. I've got you." She checked his pulse, racing but not dangerously high. Not yet. "We're going to the safe room, remember? Just like we practiced." They'd drilled this. Dominic had insisted, and Elena had agreed, making it a game so Marco wouldn't be too scared. Now she was grateful for the practice as she carried him into the hallway, following the route they'd memorized. More gunfire. Closer now. She could hear men shouting in Italian, the crash of breaking glass. 8 attackers, Vincent had said in the briefing. 8 men coming to take Marco, to hurt him, to use him against Dominic. Over her dead body. Elena ran, her bare feet slapping against marble floors, Marco's arms wrapped around her neck. The safe room was at the end of the east wing, reinforced steel hidden behind a bookshelf, stocked with supplies and communications equipment. 50 feet, 40, 30. A man appeared in the corridor ahead of them. Not one of theirs. Elena knew all of Dominic's guards by sight, and this man was a stranger. Tall, armed, his gun rising as he spotted them. She didn't think, didn't hesitate. Just shifted Marco to one arm and grabbed the nearest object, a heavy bronze statue from a side table, and hurled it at the attacker's head. It connected with a sickening crunch. The man went down, and Elena ran past him, her heart hammering. Marco's face buried against her shoulder. 20 feet. 10. Another man stepped out from a side corridor, gun aimed directly at Marco. Time slowed. Elena saw the gun, saw his finger tightening on the trigger, saw the cold calculation in his eyes. She saw her brother's face underwater, saw all the children she'd saved, saw Marco's smile when he'd learned she was staying forever. She turned her body, putting herself between the gun and the child, and felt the impact like a hammer to her shoulder. Pain exploded through her, white-hot and overwhelming. She crashed into the wall, her grip on Marco loosening, but she didn't let go. Couldn't let go. Used her body to shield him as they slid to the floor, blood already soaking through her shirt. Elena! Marco's scream was piercing. Elena! No! She couldn't answer, could barely breathe. But she kept herself between him and the attacker, kept her arms around him, kept him safe. That's all that mattered. Keep him safe. The attacker stepped closer, gun raised again. Then Dominic's guard, Thomas, she thought his name was, appeared from nowhere and put 2 bullets in the attacker's chest. The man dropped, and Thomas was there, kneeling beside them, his hands already applying pressure to Elena's shoulder. "Safe room," she gasped. "Get Marco to the safe room." "You're coming too." Thomas lifted her like she weighed nothing, Marco still clutched in her arms, and ran the last 10 feet to the bookshelf. He hit the hidden switch, and the door swung open, revealing the reinforced room beyond. He deposited them inside, and Elena finally let herself collapse against the wall, Marco still in her lap. Blood was everywhere, on her shirt, on Marco, on the floor. The pain was incredible, stealing her breath, making her vision swim. "Elena, please don't die." Marco's face was white, his hands pressing against her shoulder like he could hold the blood in. "Please, please don't die." "Not dying," she managed. "Just a scratch." "That's not a scratch." His voice broke on a sob. "You're bleeding so much." Thomas was on the radio, calling for medical support, his voice urgent. Elena tried to focus, tried to assess her own injury through the pain. Bullet to the left shoulder, through and through by the feel of it. Painful, but not immediately life-threatening if they controlled the bleeding. She'd live. She'd live because Marco needed her to live. The sounds of fighting continued outside the safe room, muffled by the reinforced walls. Elena held Marco with her good arm, letting him cry against her chest, feeling his heart racing under her palm. Too fast. Dangerous territory. She needed to calm him down before fear triggered an arrhythmia. "Hey, Bambino," she whispered. "Look at me." He lifted his tear-stained face. "Remember what I taught you? About breathing?" She demonstrated, slow and deep, ignoring the way it made her shoulders scream. "Breathe with me. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. But you're hurt, and I'll be fine, but I need you to be fine too, so breathe with me." They breathed together, his small chest rising and falling in sync with hers, his heart rate gradually slowing. Elena kept her eyes on his face, kept her voice calm and steady, even though inside she was screaming. She'd been shot. She'd taken a bullet meant for a child. And somewhere out there, Dominic was fighting for their lives. "Please let him be okay. Please let him survive this. Please let us all survive this." The door to the safe room burst open, and Elena's good hand reached for the gun Thomas had left on the table, ready to fight with her last breath if necessary. But it was Dominic who appeared, covered in blood and fury, his eyes wild until they found them. "Marco! Elena!" Her name came out broken. He crossed the room in 2 strides, dropping to his knees beside them, his hands hovering over Elena's shoulder like he was afraid to touch. "You're shot. How bad is it?" "Through and through. Missed the bone. I'll be fine." Elena tried to smile, but it came out as a grimace. "Marco's okay. That's what matters. You took a bullet for him." Dominic's voice was shaking. "You put yourself between my son and a gun." "Of course I did." She met his eyes, saw the terror and rage and love all tangled together. "He's mine to protect." Something broke in Dominic's face. He pulled them both into his arms, careful of Elena's shoulder, and held them like he'd never let go. "You're both mine to protect, and I failed. I let this happen." "You didn't fail." Elena's good hand found his face, forcing him to look at her. "We're alive. We're together. You didn't fail." Marco was crying again, overwhelmed by fear and relief and too many emotions for a 7-year-old to process. Dominic kissed his son's head, then Elena's forehead, his lips gentle despite the violence still echoing through the house. "Is it over?" Elena asked. It's over. His voice was cold, deadly. 5 attackers dead. 3 captured. My men are securing the perimeter. The Vitellis made a mistake coming here. What happens now? Now I make sure they never threaten my family again. He looked at Thomas. Get the doctor up here. I don't care if the house is still on fire. I want Elena treated immediately. I'm okay, Elena protested, but the room was starting to spin. You're not okay. You're shot and losing blood and… Dominic's voice cracked. You saved my son's life. Again. And you almost died doing it. So you're going to let the doctor treat you, and you're going to rest, and you're going to let me take care of you for once. Elena wanted to argue, but the adrenaline was wearing off and the pain was overwhelming and she was so tired. She leaned against Dominic, felt his arms around her and Marco pressed between them, and let herself believe they were safe. For now, they were safe. The doctor arrived, the same one who'd treated Marco that first night, and worked quickly to clean and dress Elena's wound. The bullet had gone clean through, missing major blood vessels and bone, but the damage to muscle and tissue was significant. She'd need surgery to repair everything properly, but for now, he stabilized her and gave her something for the pain. Elena drifted in a haze of medication and exhaustion, aware of Marco's small hand in hers, of Dominic's presence like an anchor. She heard voices, Vincent reporting, guards giving updates, staff assessing damage, but it all felt distant, unimportant compared to the warmth of the 2 people she loved most in the world. Stay with me, Dominic whispered against her hair. Please stay with me. Always, she murmured. Promised Marco forever, remember? Forever, he echoed, and she felt him relax slightly. Marco hadn't left her side, his fingers wrapped around hers, his eyes never leaving her face. You're really okay? He asked for the 10th time. Really okay, Bambino, just sleepy. You saved me. His voice was small, awed. The bad man was going to hurt me and you stopped him. That's my job, keeping you safe. But you got hurt. Worth it. Elena squeezed his hand gently. You're worth everything, Marco. He climbed carefully onto the couch beside her, curling against her good side, his head on her chest. Elena's arm came around him automatically and she felt Dominic's hand cover both of theirs. This was what mattered. Not the money or the contract or the complications. Just this. The 3 of them together, alive, a family forged in crisis and sealed in blood. Elena closed her eyes and let the medication pull her under, secure in the knowledge that she was exactly where she belonged. The next week passed in a blur of recovery and reckoning. Elena's shoulder healed slowly, the pain manageable with medication, but the weakness frustrating. She couldn't lift Marco, couldn't do the physical care she was used to providing. It drove her crazy, being dependent on others when she was supposed to be the caregiver. But Marco adapted, becoming her helper instead of her patient. He brought her water, read to her, sat beside her during the day and told her stories to keep her entertained. He was processing the trauma in his own way, and Elena recognized the signs, the nightmares, the clinginess, the way he needed to touch her constantly to reassure himself she was real. She didn't mind. She needed the reassurance too. Dominic was different after the attack, harder, colder. He spent days systematically dismantling the Vitelli organization, and Elena didn't ask for details. She saw the results in his exhausted returns home, in the blood on his knuckles that he tried to wash away before seeing Marco, in the darkness in his eyes that only cleared when he looked at his family. She should have been horrified, should have been afraid of this man who could order deaths with a phone call and sleep soundly afterward. But she understood. He was protecting them, ensuring no future threats, building a safe world for his son, for their son, even if he had to destroy everything in his path to do it. One night, 2 weeks after the attack, he came to her room. She was reading in bed, her shoulders still bandaged but healing well, when he knocked softly and entered without waiting for permission. He looked destroyed, exhausted and haunted and barely holding himself together. "It's done," he said quietly. "The Vitellis are finished. Their leadership is dead or in custody. Their operations are dismantled. There's no one left to threaten Marco." "Good." Elena set aside her book. "Come here." He crossed to the bed and sat on the edge, his shoulders slumped. "I can't stop seeing it. You, bleeding. Marco, terrified. Everything I love almost taken from me." "But it wasn't taken. We're here. We're okay." "You took a bullet, Elena. You could have died. But I didn't." She reached for his hand with her good arm. "I made a choice, Dominic. I chose to protect Marco, and I'd make the same choice again. I know you would. That's what terrifies me." He looked at her, and his eyes were raw. "I can't lose you. Either of you. I won't survive it. You're not going to lose us." Elena pulled him down beside her, ignoring the twinge in her shoulder. "We're a family now. Families stick together, even through the scary stuff." He held her carefully, mindful of her injury, and she felt the tension gradually drain from his body. "I'm getting out," he said finally. "The illegal operations, all of it. I'm done. Vincent thinks I'm crazy, but I don't care. I want a different life, for Marco, for you, for us." Elena pulled back to look at his face. "You mean that?" "I mean it. I've already started the process. Selling off territories, shutting down operations, transitioning to legitimate businesses only. It'll take time, but I'm done with this life. Done with the violence and the fear and the constant threat." His hand cupped her face. "You and Marco deserve better. Deserve a father and partner who comes home safe every night." "We deserve you," Elena said firmly. "However you come. But if you want to change, if you want to build something different, I support that. We both do." "I love you." The words came out fierce, certain. "I know it's fast and crazy and probably the worst timing ever, but I love you, Elena Vasquez. I want to marry you. I want to build a life with you. I want to give Marco the family he deserves and wake up beside you every morning for the rest of my life." Elena's breath caught. That's a lot." "Too much?" "No." She smiled, feeling tears prick her eyes. "Not too much, just right. I love you too, Dominic, and yes." "Yes?" "Yes to all of it. Marriage and family and building a life together. Yes." He kissed her then, gentle and reverent, like she was something precious. Elena kissed him back, pouring everything she felt into the touch. Love and gratitude and hope for the future they'd build together. They broke apart at the sound of small feet in the hallway. Marco appeared in the doorway, rubbing his eyes, his stuffed lion dragging on the floor. "I had a bad dream," he said. "Can I sleep with you guys?" Elena and Dominic looked at each other, then at Marco. "Come here, Bambino," Elena said, making room in the bed. Marco climbed in between them, snuggling against Elena's good side, and Dominic's arm came around both of them. They lay there in the darkness, the three of them tangled together, and Elena thought about how far they'd come from that rainy night when she'd stopped to save a dying boy. She'd saved his life, but in doing so she'd saved her own too, found the family she'd been searching for, found the love she'd stopped believing in, found a home in the most unexpected place. "Love you, Ellie," Marco mumbled, already half asleep. "Love you too, Bambino." "Love you both," Dominic whispered, and Elena, wrapped in the warmth of the two people who'd become her entire world, whispered back, "Love you both, more than anything." They fell asleep like that. A family, imperfect and complicated and absolutely perfect. The months that followed were a study in transformation. Elena's shoulder healed, leaving a scar she wore like a badge of honor. Dominic systematically dismantled his criminal empire, transitioning to legitimate import-export businesses and real estate investments. It wasn't easy. Some of his associates resisted. Some tried to take advantage of his perceived weakness. Some simply walked away. But he was relentless, driven by his love for his family and his determination to build a different future. The FBI came calling 3 months after the attack. Detective Sarah Chen appeared at the estate, all business and barely concealed suspicion, with an offer Elena hadn't expected. "We know what happened with the Vitellis," Chen said, sitting across from Elena in the library. "We know about the attack, about your injury, and we know Dominic Torino has been making moves to legitimize his operations. So?" Elena kept her voice neutral. "So, we're offering you a deal. Testify about what you've seen. Help us build a case against the remaining criminal elements in his organization. In exchange, we'll offer you protection, relocation if necessary, immunity for any involvement you might have had." Elena stared at her. "You think I'm a victim? That I need rescuing?" "Aren't you?" Chen leaned forward. "You're a nurse who got caught up with a dangerous man. You took a bullet protecting his son. You're living in his house, isolated from your old life. If he's controlling you, he's not controlling me." Elena's voice was sharp. "I'm here by choice. I love him. I love Marco. This is my family." "Family?" Chen's expression was skeptical. "Or Stockholm Syndrome. I'm a grown woman making informed choices. And I'm choosing them." Elena stood, making it clear the conversation was over. "I appreciate your concern, Detective. But I don't need saving. I'm exactly where I want to be." Chen left her card anyway, with a warning about the dangers of loving a man like Dominic Torino. Elena threw it away without looking at it twice, but the visit shook her more than she wanted to admit. She found herself in the garden that evening, staring at the flowers and questioning everything. Was she crazy? Was she making excuses for a criminal? Was she putting Marco in danger by staying? Second thoughts. Dominic's voice came from behind her. Elena turned to find him watching her, his expression unreadable. "The FBI came today." "I know. Vincent told me. They think I'm being controlled, that I need rescuing." "Do you?" "No." The answer came immediately from somewhere deep and certain. "I'm here because I choose to be. Because I love you and Marco. Because this is my home. Even knowing what I've done, what I've been." Elena crossed to him, taking his hands in hers. "You're not that person anymore. You're changing, building something better. And even if you weren't, I'd still choose you, because I see who you are underneath. A father who loves his son desperately, a man trying to be better, someone who gave me a family when I needed one most. The world won't see it that way. Your friends, your colleagues, they'll judge you for this choice." "Let them judge." Elena's voice was fierce. "I know my own mind. I know my own heart. And both belong to you and Marco." He pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was his anchor. "I don't deserve you." "Probably not. But you're stuck with me anyway." They stood there in the garden as the sun set, and Elena felt the last of her doubts dissolve. This was right. This was home. Nothing the FBI or anyone else said could change that. Her old friend Maya visited a week later, and the conversation went about as well as Elena expected. "You're really doing this?" Maya asked, looking around the mansion with barely concealed horror. "Living with a Mafia boss, raising his kid. This isn't you, Elena. It is me now. He's a criminal. He's hurt people, probably killed people. And you're just okay with that?" Elena set down her coffee carefully. "He's changing, leaving that life behind. And yes, I'm okay with his past because I understand it. He did what he thought he had to do to survive, to protect his son. I'm not excusing it, but I'm not condemning him for it either. That's insane. You're making excuses for—" "I'm making a choice." Elena's voice was firm. "A choice to love someone complicated, to build a family with someone who's trying to be better. And I need you to respect that, even if you don't understand it." Maya stood, her face tight with disappointment. "I can't watch you do this. I can't watch you throw away your life for some fantasy of redemption and family." "Then don't watch." The words hurt, but Elena meant them. "I love you, Maya. You're my best friend. But if you can't support this, if you can't accept the choice I'm making, then maybe we need some distance." Maya left, and Elena cried for the loss of that friendship. But she didn't regret her choice. Couldn't regret it. Not when Marco was thriving and Dominic was building a better life and she was happier than she'd ever been. Some bridges had to burn for new ones to be built. The proposal came on a morning 3 months after the attack, in the garden where they'd first started to fall in love. Elena woke to find Dominic already gone, a note on his pillow asking her to meet him in the garden at 10. No explanation, just the request. She showered and dressed, her curiosity building, and found Marco waiting at the bottom of the stairs with a grin that suggested he was in on whatever was happening. "Papa says I get to help," he announced proudly. "But I can't tell you what we're doing. It's a surprise." A surprise? Elena let him take her hand and lead her through the house. What kind of surprise? The best kind. That's all he would say, practically bouncing with excitement. The garden was beautiful in the morning light, flowers blooming in riots of color, the fountain bubbling peacefully. Dominic stood beside the fountain, dressed casually in jeans and a button-down shirt, his hands in his pockets. He looked nervous, which was so unlike him that Elena's heart started to race. "What's going on?" she asked. "Come here." He held out his hand, and she took it, letting him draw her close. Marco positioned himself beside them, still grinning. "I had this whole elaborate plan. Dinner, music, roses, the works. But then I realized that's not us. We're not elaborate. We're simple and real and honest. Dominic, let me finish." He pulled something from his pocket, a ring box, small and velvet. "I know we've only known each other 4 months. I know this is fast and crazy and probably breaks all the rules about appropriate timelines. But I also know I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I know I want Marco to have you as his mother, officially and legally. I know I want to wake up beside you every morning and fall asleep holding you every night." He opened the box, revealing a ring that took Elena's breath away. It was beautiful, a sapphire surrounded by diamonds, elegant and unique and perfect. "This was Sophia's ring," he said quietly. "But I had it redesigned. The sapphire is new, your birthstone. The setting is new. The only thing from the original is the band, because I wanted her blessing on this. Wanted her to be part of our future, even though she's gone." Elena's eyes filled with tears. The gesture was so thoughtful, so perfect, honoring his past while building their future. "Elena Vasquez, will you marry me? Will you be my wife, Marco's mother, my partner in building this new life? Will you make this real and permanent and forever?" "Say yes." Marco couldn't contain himself. "Please say yes, Ellie. I want you to be my real mom." Elena looked at Dominic's face, at the vulnerability and hope in his eyes. Looked at Marco, practically vibrating with excitement. Looked at this life they'd built together, this family that had formed in crisis and grown in love. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking on the word. "Yes to all of it. Marriage and family and forever. Yes." Dominic slipped the ring on her finger and it fit perfectly. Of course it did. He was thorough, always prepared. Then he pulled her into a kiss that was soft and sweet and full of promise. Marco cheered and threw his arms around both of them, and they stood there in the garden, the 3 of them holding each other, and Elena thought about how far they'd come. From a rainy street to this moment, from strangers to family, from survival to joy. "I love you," Dominic whispered against her hair. "I love you too. Both of you." Elena held them tighter. "My boys, my family." "Forever," Marco said firmly. "Forever," they echoed, and the word felt like a vow, a promise, a future written in hope and sealed with love. The wedding came 2 months later, small and intimate in a chapel that held only their closest people. 20 guests, Rosa and Vincent, a few of Dominic's trusted associates, the doctor who'd treated both Marco and Elena, Detective Chen who'd surprisingly become an ally. Elena had no family left to invite, but she didn't feel the absence. This was her family now, these people who'd stood by them through everything. Marco was the ring-bearer, taking his job with utmost seriousness. He wore a tiny suit that made him look impossibly grown up, and he carried the rings on a pillow like they were the most precious things in the world, which to him they probably were. Elena wore a simple ivory dress, nothing elaborate, with wildflowers in her hair that Marco had helped pick that morning. She walked down the aisle alone, because she didn't need anyone to give her away. She was giving herself, freely and completely. Dominic waited at the altar in a dark suit, his eyes locked on her face, and the love in his expression made her breath catch. This man, who'd been so closed off and guarded when they met, was now open and vulnerable, and hers. The vows were traditional, but they added their own promises. Dominic vowed to keep her safe, to honor her choices, to build a life worthy of her love. Elena vowed to stand by him, to love Marco as her own, to build a family that honored both their pasts while creating a better future. When the officiant asked if anyone objected, Marco raised his hand. Everyone froze until he said, "I object to waiting any longer. Can they kiss now?" Laughter rippled through the chapel, and the officiant smiled. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Dominic pulled Elena close and kissed her like it was the first time, and the last time, and every time in between, like she was air and water and everything he needed to survive. Elena kissed him back, feeling the rightness of it settle into her bones, and when they broke apart, she was crying and smiling and happier than she'd ever been. Marco hugged them both, and then they were surrounded by well-wishers, by love and support and hope for their future. Detective Chen pulled Elena aside, her expression softer than usual. "I was wrong about you," she said quietly. "About him too, maybe. You're not a victim. You're a woman who made a hard choice and made it work. I respect that." "Thank you," Elena said, meaning it. "For what it's worth, I think you're going to be okay. All three of you." "We are." Elena looked at her new husband and her son, because Marco was her son now, legally and emotionally. "We really are." The reception was held at the estate, in the garden where Dominic had proposed. They danced under string lights, ate Giuseppe's amazing food, and celebrated with the people who mattered most. Marco fell asleep on Elena's lap during dinner, exhausted from excitement, and she held him while talking to guests, feeling the weight of him like a blessing. This was her life now, her family, her future, and it was more than she'd ever dreamed possible. 6 months later, life had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Dominic's legitimate businesses were thriving, his reputation slowly shifting from feared criminal to respected businessman. It helped that he'd started a foundation in Sophia's name, funding pediatric cardiac research and supporting families dealing with heart conditions in children. Elena worked part-time at the Children's Hospital, keeping her skills sharp and maintaining her connection to the work she loved. But her primary focus was Marco, who was now 8 and thriving in ways no one had thought possible. His heart condition was stable, his confidence growing, his joy in life infectious. They'd become a normal family, or as normal as possible given their circumstances. School runs and homework help and family dinners, movie nights and board games and lazy Sunday mornings. The occasional security concern, but nothing like before. Nothing that threatened the peace they'd built. One afternoon, Elena was at the park with Marco when a child fell from the swings. She was there immediately, assessing the injury, a cut on the forehead, bleeding but not serious. The mother was panicking, but Elena calmly applied pressure, explained what she was doing, called for an ambulance. Marco handed her supplies from her bag without being asked, remembering everything she'd taught him. Other parents watched, impressed, and when the paramedics arrived and thanked her, one asked her name. "Elena Torino," she said, and felt a surge of pride at the name. "I'm a pediatric nurse." The mother hugged her, thanking her profusely, asking how she'd stayed so calm. Elena just smiled. Practice, and a good teacher. She ruffled Marco's hair, and he beamed up at her. Walking home, Marco asked, "Can I be a nurse like you when I grow up?" Elena's heart swelled. "You can be anything you want, Bambino. Nurse, doctor, teacher, artist, whatever makes you happy." "I think I want to help kids like you do, kids who are sick or scared. I want to make them feel better." "Then that's what you'll do." Elena squeezed his hand. "You're going to be amazing at it." They arrived home to find Dominic waiting, a strange expression on his face. "We need to talk," he said, and Elena's stomach dropped until she saw he was smiling. "What's going on?" He pulled out a folder, handed it to her. "The foundation just got its first major breakthrough. The research we funded led to a new treatment protocol for long QT syndrome. Early trials show a 90% improvement in outcomes. They're calling it the Marco Protocol." Elena stared at the papers, tears filling her eyes. "They're naming it after him?" "After him. After you. After the nurse who saved a dying boy in the rain and changed everything." Dominic pulled her into his arms. "You did this. Your choice to stop that night, to save him, to stay. It's saving other children now, dozens of them, maybe hundreds." "We did this," Elena corrected. "All of us together." Marco hugged them both, and they stood there in the foyer of their home, holding each other, and Elena thought about that rainy night that felt like a lifetime ago. Thought about the choice she'd made, the path she'd taken, the family she'd found. She'd saved Marco's life. But in doing so, she'd saved her own. Found purpose and love and belonging. Built a family from tragedy and choice and determination. Transformed a Mafia boss into a devoted father and husband. Turned a dying boy into a thriving child who wanted to help others. And now they were saving more children, spreading hope and healing in ripples that would extend far beyond their small family. 5 years later, Elena stood in the same garden where Dominic had proposed, watching Marco, now 13, play with his little sister Sophia. The toddler adored her big brother, following him everywhere, and Marco was endlessly patient with her, teaching her about flowers and butterflies and the world. Sophia was 3 years old, named for Marco's mother, with Elena's eyes and Dominic's stubborn determination. She was healthy and happy and completely spoiled by everyone in the house. Dominic came up behind Elena, wrapping his arms around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" "How far we've come. How different life is now." "Better?" "So much better." She leaned back against him. "The foundation saved 43 children last year. Marco's talking about going to medical school. Sophia's first word was, 'Papa.' We're happy, Dominic. Really, genuinely happy." "We are." He turned her to face him. "Because of you. Because you stopped in the rain that night. Because you were brave enough to stay, to love us, to build this with us. Because you were brave enough to change, to leave that life behind and build something better." They kissed, soft and sweet, years of love and partnership in the touch. Sophia saw them and came running, demanding to be picked up, and Marco followed with a grin. "Gross," he said, but he was laughing. "You guys are always kissing." "Get used to it," Elena told him, pulling him into a hug. "We're going to be gross and in love forever." "Forever's a long time," Marco said, echoing words from years ago. "Not long enough," Dominic replied, echoing his own response. They stood there in the garden, the four of them together, and Elena thought about all the moments that had led to this one. The rain and the CPR and the terror. The flower fights and the card games and the breakthrough. The attack and the blood and the choice to stay. The proposal and the wedding and the building of a life. Every moment had mattered. Every choice had led here. To this family, this love, this life they'd built together. That evening, after the children were asleep, Elena found herself on the terrace where she and Dominic had first confessed their feelings. She looked up at the stars, the same stars that had witnessed their beginning, and felt a profound sense of peace. She'd been a struggling nurse with $8 in her bank account and no hope for the future. Now she was a wife, a mother, a director of a foundation that saved lives. She had a family who loved her, a home that felt safe, a purpose that fulfilled her, all because she'd stopped in the rain, all because she'd chosen courage over fear, love over safety, hope over despair. Dominic joined her as he always did, and they stood together in comfortable silence. Finally he said, "Do you ever regret it, stopping that night?" "Never." Elena's answer was immediate, certain. Not for a single second. Even with everything that happened, the danger, the violence, the complications, especially because of all that. She turned to face him, because it led to this, to us, to a family I never thought I'd have and a love I never thought I'd find. You and Marco saved me just as much as I saved him. We saved each other. Dominic pulled her close. That's what families do. They stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, and Elena thought about the rain that had changed everything, about the dying boy who'd become her son, about the Mafia boss who'd become her husband, about the life she'd built from a single moment of courage. She thought about her brother, who'd drowned all those years ago, and hoped he'd be proud of the woman she'd become, hoped he'd understand that his death hadn't been meaningless, that it had driven her to save others, to find purpose in tragedy. She thought about all the children the foundation had helped, all the families who'd been given hope, all the lives that had been changed because she'd stopped in the rain one exhausted evening and breathed life into a dying child. And she thought about the future, Marco growing up to help others, Sophia learning to be brave and kind, Dominic continuing to build a legacy of redemption and change, a future bright with possibility, built on a foundation of love and choice and courage. The rain that had changed everything had been a gift, a terrible, beautiful, transforming gift that had taken her from survival to joy, from loneliness to belonging, from despair to hope. She'd saved a life that night, but in doing so, she'd found her own, and that made every moment, every choice, every sacrifice worth it. "I love you," she whispered against Dominic's chest. "I love you too." His arms tightened around her. "Forever." "Forever," she echoed, and meant it with every fiber of her being, because sometimes forever starts with a single moment, a choice made in the rain, a life saved on a street corner, a heart that refuses to give up, and sometimes, if you're very lucky, that moment transforms into a lifetime of love, laughter, and family. Elena Vasquez, now Elena Torino, had been very lucky indeed. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe for more emotional tales of courage, love, and redemption. Share this with someone who needs to believe in second chances and the power of choosing love over fear. Drop a comment telling me which moment made you cry. I read every single one, and your support means everything. Thank you for being here and being part of this journey.